August 19, 636 AD, the armies of Islam and Byzantium met in what would become known as the Battle of Yarmouk, one of the most important battles in all of history. The Muslim army consisted of around 40 to 60,000 men, mostly consisting of Arab tribes who had recently converted to Islam under the rule of their charismatic leader, Caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab. They were facing off against an equal force of Byzantine soldiers, who were veterans of many campaigns and were very well trained in the art of war.
Ho, ho, ho!
The battle would be long and bloody, and at one point it appeared that the Muslims were going to be routed, but a surprise attack from an unexpected source turned the tide of battle and secured a decisive victory for the Muslims. This victory would allow them to take control of Syria and Egypt, two of the richest provinces of the Byzantine Empire. It would also open up the rest of the Middle East to Muslim conquest. But perhaps most importantly, this day would change Islamic history forever.
Ho, ho, ho!
When we think of famous battles, we usually think of epic showdowns between two great warriors or maybe two rival nations. But few battles were more important than Yarmouk, which changed the course of not just one empire's history, but three: the Byzantines, the Persians, and the Arabs. All three of these empires were about to enter a new era after this battle. But before we get into that, let's look at how they got there. During the 7th century, the Roman Empire was in its twilight years. By now, half of the empire's territory had been lost to various Germanic tribes.
Ho, ho, ho!
And the remaining eastern half was in a constant state of warfare with the rising Persian Sassanid Empire. As a result, the once proud Roman army was in sharp decline. Meanwhile, a new religion had emerged in the Arabian Peninsula called Islam, and its message of submission to the one true God was attracting followers from all walks of life. Many of the early Muslims were non-Arab peoples who were subjugated by the various Arab tribes. So, when the Meccan elite sought to expand Islam beyond the Arabian Peninsula, these subject peoples rose up in revolt.
Ho, ho, ho!
Over the next few decades, the Muslim armies would conquer the Levant and Mesopotamia. Now they were poised to take the next step towards greatness, but they would have to do it without their prophet. In 632, Muhammad died and was succeeded by Abu Bakr as caliph, or successor. Abu Bakr wasted no time in expanding Islam further. He supported the conquest of Syria and sent his best general, Khalid ibn al-Walid, to turn the tide of the war in Mesopotamia. But while Khalid was successful, the Muslims had overextended themselves and their enemies were regrouping.
Ho, ho, ho!
Emperor Heraclius of Byzantium was gathering an army to drive the Muslims back across the Euphrates. And in 636, the two forces met at the Battle of Yarmouk. Yarmouk is often called the battle that changed the course of history, and for good reason. First of all, it led to the rapid collapse of the Byzantine Empire. After suffering defeat at Yarmouk, the Byzantines would never be the same. The Muslims would continue to push westwards, and by the end of the 7th century, they had conquered all of North Africa. The Muslim armies would even push into Spain, where they would remain for several centuries.
Ho, ho, ho!
Though the Byzantines would eventually regain some of their lost territory, the damage was done. Their loss at Yarmouk signaled the end of their dominance in the region and the beginning of their long decline. But Yarmouk also played a major role in the rise of Islam. The Muslim victory at Yarmouk was a shock to the world. No one expected a ragtag group of desert tribesmen to defeat one of the most powerful armies in the world. But they did it anyway. And this victory showed the world that Islam was a force to be reckoned with.
Ho, ho, ho!
In the wake of their victory at Yarmouk, the Muslims would go on to conquer much of the Middle East, North Africa, and the Iberian Peninsula. Today, there are over 1.8 billion Muslims in the world, and it's clear that the Battle of Yarmouk played a major role in the rise of Islam. But perhaps most importantly, the Battle of Yarmouk led to the creation of Dar al-Islam, or the House of Islam. This is the name given to the Muslim world during the 7th century, which stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indus River.
Ho, ho, ho!
Never before had there been a world-spanning civilization based on religion, and the creation of the House of Islam would have a profound impact on the world. It would foster trade and cultural exchange across vast distances, and it would help to spread Islam to all corners of the globe. And finally, we should also note that the Battle of Yarmouk was one of the last major battles of the ancient world. The armies that fought at Yarmouk were using weapons and tactics that had been developed over centuries. But the battle was also one of the first battles of the medieval period.
Ho, ho, ho!
The Muslim army was using new weapons and tactics that would become common in the medieval period. And the battle was also one of the first battles in which gunpowder was used. This makes the Battle of Yarmouk a very significant event in military history. It is a battle that bridges the ancient and medieval worlds, and it gives us insight into the military technology and tactics that were developing during this time period. Now let's talk about the battle itself. The battle took place in the summer of 636 near the city of Yarmouk, located in modern-day Jordan.
Ho, ho, ho!
The Muslim army was led by generals Amr ibn al-As and Shurba ibn al-Ashraf, while the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius commanded his own forces personally. Both sides were evenly matched with roughly 40,000 to 60,000 soldiers each. However, the Muslim army was made up of hastily assembled troops from various Arab tribes who had recently converted to Islam. On the other hand, the Byzantine army was made up of veteran soldiers who had years of experience fighting in wars against the Persians. So, although both sides had equal numbers, the Byzantines were definitely more experienced.
Ho, ho, ho!
Despite being outnumbered, the Muslim army was able to defeat the Byzantines at the Battle of Yarmouk. This was due to a number of factors. First, the Muslims were more motivated than the Byzantines. The Muslims were fighting for their newly founded religion, while the Byzantines were fighting to defend their empire. Second, the Muslims were better led than the Byzantines. The Muslim generals, Amr ibn al-As and Shurba ibn al-Ashraf, were able to outmaneuver the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius. And finally, the Muslims were more disciplined than the Byzantines.
Ho, ho, ho!
The Muslim army was able to hold their ground against the Byzantine attacks, while the Byzantine army broke ranks and fled in some instances. The battle itself was a close-fought affair, and neither side was able to gain a decisive advantage. For several days, the two armies traded blows, and neither side was able to break through the other's lines. However, on the third day of the battle, the Muslims launched a surprise attack on the Byzantine camp, and this proved to be the turning point of the battle.
Ho, ho, ho!
The Muslims were able to capture the Byzantine emperor's tent, and this caused the Byzantine army to panic and flee. The Muslims then pursued the fleeing Byzantines and inflicted heavy casualties on them. In the end, the Muslims were victorious, and this victory allowed them to conquer Syria and Egypt. These were two of the richest provinces of the Byzantine Empire, and their conquest allowed the Muslims to raise a massive army of 70,000 men. With this army, they would go on to conquer North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula.
Ho, ho, ho!
As for the Byzantines, they would never recover from their defeat at Yarmouk. The Muslims would continue to push westwards, and by the end of the 7th century, they had conquered all of North Africa. The Muslim armies would even push into Spain, where they would remain for several centuries. After winning the Battle of Yarmouk, the Muslims would go on to conquer a vast amount of territory. They would conquer Syria, Egypt, North Africa, and the Iberian Peninsula. They would even push into France, but they would be defeated at the Battle of Tours in 732.
Ho, ho, ho!
Overall, the Muslims would conquer a vast amount of territory during the 7th century. This was due to a number of factors. First, the Muslims were a highly motivated and disciplined army. This is evident from their victory at the Battle of Yarmouk, where they were outnumbered but still managed to defeat the Byzantine army. Second, the Muslims had a strong centralized government under the caliphs. This allowed them to raise a large and well-equipped army. Finally, the Muslims were fighting a defensive war.
Ho, ho, ho!
This meant that they were able to conserve their strength and resources while inflicting maximum damage on their enemies. This is why the Muslims were able to conquer so much territory so quickly. The Battle of Yarmouk was one of the most important battles in history. It marked the beginning of the end for the Byzantine Empire and the beginning of the rise of Islam. If you want to learn more about the Battle of Yarmouk, we recommend checking out some of our other videos on the subject. Thanks for watching.
Ho, ho, ho!